Welcome to What the Theory with Joel. My name is Joel, and today we're going to be doing the first in a series on being and nothingness, which is a book about existentialism. Now, you might recall I did a bit on existentialism and nihilism a few episodes back, so that was more generally looking at it from a Nietzschean perspective. This is more an idea of fundamental existentialism, like the existence and essence difference. So we'll start with chapter 1, and it's incredibly difficult to break these ideas down, but I'm going to try. I've been reading this book all through this year, and I finally think I have a way into it. So bear with me, the introduction may take a while, but I promise you it will make sense. I promise, I hope. If you look at ancient philosophy, there was this guy called Parmenides, and his idea was that you can only speak about things that exist. To talk about things that don't exist doesn't make any sense, because you can just say anything. So the measure of something being truthful was that it had to exist, and whatever you said matched up with what you said. Fast forward a few hundred years later, and you've got Mr. Bighead himself, Plato, saying that, well, imagine that you were talking about this room, for instance. And in this room, you might say, everything is here, this screen, this laptop, this skull, but there's also a giant unicorn in the room. Now, from his perspective, from the Parmenides perspective, for you to say that is nonsensical because it doesn't match up with anything in reality. But Plato's question was, what fact would make you know that that unicorn isn't here? It's a negation, it's a negative thing. It means that something is lacking. And that's the introduction of nothingness into modern parlance. If you continue down the line, you end up with our French boy Descartes. Now, Descartes, his big contribution to philosophy was that how do you know that you actually exist? How do you know that everything that you believe is not just a simulation, or everything that you believe is false? Now, he took the radical position of taking all his beliefs, emptying them out completely, and saying, what is the base thing that I can believe? What is the thing that is a priori correct? And he got to the point that I am thinking, therefore I am. It's often said as I think, therefore I am, but it's actually I am thinking, therefore I am. Meaning that a thought cannot happen without a thinker. And so at the very base of anything, I have to exist because I am thinking, I am questioning that. Along comes Mr. Sarte, and he's saying that perhaps it's the other way around. And his question is that if you say I am thinking, therefore I am, that the I that is thinking and the I that is recognized as am are two different I's. It sounds crazy, but I promise you it will make some sense. So in the book Being and Nothingness, the first chapter is really talking about a refutation of metaphysics all up until that point in the 20th century. And the idea was that everyone from Plato to Kant said there are appearances that we see. There are things, the world appears to be a certain way, but behind it there is a true reality. And the question had always shifted from what is that true reality? Is it a spiritual world? Is it a world of forms? Is it a world that we can never access? Like Kant used to say that all we can access are appearances, but we can't get beyond our own perceptions to go to the world in and of itself. And if you want to, sort of hear what we thought about that, you can look at the episode on true world theories. Sartre's argument was that the appearance of any phenomenon is pure and absolute. And his point is that there is no thing behind the thing. It is an abstraction for us to think that there is a way in which we can pierce through appearances and get to reality, as though that reality itself wouldn't just be an appearance to ourselves. But in a much deeper way, he's sort of, this is how I've gotten into it, he's sort of arguing that when you use the word I and when you use the word me, you are betraying a sort of duality that exists within you. One in which you're in a subjective state and another in which you're an object in the world. And what do I mean by that? When I say I have, or I wish, or I see, I am speaking subjectively. It is an action that is of my volition. I do something. I am propelling myself through the world. I am equating my internal state of feeling with something being brought about in the world. When I say something happened to me, or someone insulted me, or someone wants to date me, many people want to do that. At that point, I am an object. I am an object for someone else's subjectivity. So if someone has been mean to me, the way I structure that sentence is I have been, as an object to that person, treated as a thing in the world, in the same way that I might treat this skull or I might treat this laptop. So you might say, well, that's just a linguistic thing. But to his point, he's saying, in order for us to think, there is a subtle distinction in which you have to negate the things that exist. So I'll take some time to talk about what he means by negation. So if we go to that example I had earlier where you may say we're in this room and there is a unicorn in this room. For me to say that there is no unicorn in this room, I have to sort of imagine a thing that could be and then negate it. By positing the question, is there something in this room? I have to have the possibility of a no, the possibility of a non-entity, that there is a positive piece of evidence by something lacking. Now, if you look through reality, no, it's a weird thing to say that there is no thing there, because everything is everything. You have to look for something for it not to be there. So you can postulate a thing that might never exist and say that that thing is not there. That is purely something that happens in human thought. The idea of creating a fictional item and then saying it's not there. That is negation, but that is negation of one type. The second type might be the example that Sarte uses in his book is, let's say you're going to a cafe to meet Pierre. And he said, I'm sitting in this cafe, I'll be there at 12. You show up at 12, you walk in, and Pierre is not there. There is a subtle difference between the first example, which you just made up in your head, like there is no unicorn in this room, and the world being as it is provides you that same evidence that that unicorn is not there, versus when you walk in and you don't see Pierre. Now, the seeing is the important thing. It's not a reflective thing. You don't have to think, just like you have to think, are there unicorns in this room? You merely, by observing, by being conscious, see that Pierre is not in the cafe. Now, his argument is that the state of affairs doesn't change, but your subjectivity, when you walk in and say, well, this guy is not there, if someone else came in who was not expecting to see Pierre, has no relationship with him, will see the very same world, the very same facts are the case, but there is nothing lacking. There is no negation. So to him, being at the root of it, there is a coil, which is nothingness. And that nothingness is how you ask questions. It's how you build potentialities. It's how you make sense of the world around you. The distinction he also gives is between an unconscious being and a conscious being. Sort of being in itself is the unconscious thing. So this skull, this table, everything is in itself. It is one of one. There is no question about what am I really, what am I trying to achieve. It's just a thing in and of itself. It's a brute fact. Interestingly, in French, an unconscious being is called un soi. I didn't know that. It sounds very close to something else. And then there's pour soi, which is being for itself. Now, his argument is that as a conscious being, you are being for itself and being in itself. And the brute fact of what you are is what being for itself reflects upon. Because think about it, if you are thinking about yourself, you have made you the object of your questioning. and you're capable of negating yourself. You're capable of saying, I am not this thing. The example it gives is, imagine someone describes you as a mother or a father or whatever the role that you might occupy is. You might identify with that role, but it's not what you are in itself. It is sort of a subjective stance that you've taken. And for you to think that you are just a father would be for you to betray the fact that you see that there is a difference, that you could be something. You could not be a father. I really hope this is not becoming so convoluted. The main idea is that nothingness is at the root of anything that is conscious. You have to see what is and what isn't. And so for something to be, there has to be something that isn't. Now, all through thought, they've always been seen as separate identities, as separate entities. There are things that are and things that aren't. Now, Parmenides would say you can't talk about the things that aren't because they are not. If you talk about them, they become things that are, the numbers and all that other kind of stuff. But his argument is that it's not two separate worlds. Nothingness sits on top of reality for us as human beings, meaning that in any moment, we're able to question, we're able to, how can I say it? You're able to negate a state of affairs. And that can be broken down into three things. Let me just pull out my notes here. Yeah, so it can be pulled out in terms of negation in being, negation in knowledge, and negation in truth. Now, let's say this table. Let's take a fact. We make an assertion that this table can hold 200 kilograms. Now, there is a world in which that is a fact, and there's a world in which it is not. Now, negation in being is that this table could exist in such a way that it holds 200 kilograms. It could also exist in such a way that it doesn't hold 200 kilograms. So there is only one potential version of what that could be. So within our minds, we hold something which is a non-thing. And that non-thing, that nothingness, is what allows us to confirm that a thing actually exists. Basic conscious creatures don't seek affirmations or confirmations. They simply move by instinct. But the human being has that split subjectivity in which at any point in time, something could both be and not be. So there is the fact of it being, of its ontology, of it actually existing. That's one, that's negation in being. It either is or it isn't. But then there is also negation in knowledge. There is the fact that you don't yet know, but it is something that you can figure out. You can put 200 kilograms on it and see if it's actually going to be held or not. At that point, you are eschewing all versions of a world in which this table could hold 200 kilograms. You find out for a fact that it can actually hold 200 kilograms or not. And that leads you to negation in truth. Every truth that we have is saying every other fact that is contradictory to what we are saying cannot exist. Let's say you believe in Jesus Christ as the only way to the Father. There is no way that can be true and any other way to God also be a fact. Those two things cannot exist. So by proclaiming a truth, the only way you proclaim that truth is by negating everything else. Things that could potentially be true, things that could possibly be true, things that other subjective beings believe to be true. So his idea is that in ourselves, there is a nothingness, and that nothingness is what allows you to ask questions. But that nothingness is almost, it's brought into the world by human thought. The reason he says that it's not nothingness that is separate is that it only comes through us. And it may be a sort of quaint example. It says, what comes from a cherry tree but cherries? What comes from an oak tree but oaks? In a way, he says being human is to create nothingness in the world. And to resolve that nothingness through action, we're consistently questioning and asking, does this really exist? Is this really true? By the fact that you ask that question, you're introducing a nothingness and piercing it into reality. No other being, as far as we can tell, has that kind of duality. More interestingly, we do that to ourselves. Am I really happy? Am I really on the right path? Am I really doing the things that are true to me? The question of am I authentic is a totally human question, but it can never fully be resolved. Why? Because if you remember at the beginning, you are a being for itself and a being in and of itself. A rock is a thing in and of itself. The only way to subjectively understand what a rock is to be a rock. Further than that, it's to be that specific rock that you're talking about. So there's no way for us to pierce beyond that veil and go, I understand what it is to be this vase, for instance. I don't know if it's a vase or vase. I'm going to annoy half the internet. This vase, this vase has a certain experience, but this thing does not have a being for itself. It is unable to pull itself out of all the things that exist and transcend and have a thought. And that's what makes it purely for itself. But we have both characteristics. Now, being human means that you have facticities. You have the way you appear, the way you were born, your height, all these facts about you. But those facts never come just in and of themselves. They come being for you. And this is the subtle point of Sarte. It's when, the famous maxim of existence precedes essence. When I look at this table, there are many things I could say about it. It is made of wood, it is 4 feet high, it's made of carbon. Like, there's so many facts about it that we can continue to ask, what is that made of? And that's an infinity. That's where science comes in. Those are studying the facts of the world that are seemingly separate from our opinions, but are always mediated by how we think about things. Now, the fact of this table being made of wood is very different than when I say the word table and immediately I'm looking at it as, how can I use this? What is it for? And that's where the pressing question of existentialism comes in. Whenever we look at the world, we're looking at it as what exists, what is, what being is for us. We're looking at it with intentionality. So consciousness is never an empty thing. You can't just be conscious with no facts existing in the world. Consciousness is a nothingness because it is totally filled up by experience. It is filled up by the information that you get, the language that you learn, the social relations, all of that. So he says being at the root of it is nothingness because it is totally externally filled. And consciousness is consciousness of something. So when you think of yourself, it is the being for itself thinking about the being in itself. You are at the same time subject and object. You are, as a subjective being, trying to understand what you are objectively. But seeing as subjectively you're trying to create essence for yourself, you end up in a tautology. You sort of end up moving from both positions back and forth, neither one of them fully capturing what you are. And this is his point around living with freedom, that we have radical freedom, and it is terrifying because at any point you choose what is true. You select how to interpret the world for yourself. And all of that is informed by maybe who you love and what you care about. It's not all a selfish thing, but it's about how do you make sense of the information that is flowing towards you. So the world is a fact in and of itself. You are a fact, but you're a queer fact. You're a curious thing that exists in the world. Now, the human attitude of inquiry, of asking questions, it puts your consciousness at a distance from the world. In order for you to ask that question, you can, as the Christians say, you are in the world, but you're not of the world. You sort of transcend it. You're able to look at it and you judge it. Every question brings up a possibility. And the importance of this is when we try and find a firm foundation of our subjectivity, it is always quicksand. It is always something that can be pulled out from under us. And I think that's the task and the horror, as well as the opportunity of existentialism, is that you are not a fact like this is a fact. Yes, you have things about you that you cannot change, but your relation to them, the way you transcend that information, is always up for grabs. So there is always a nothingness, there is always a negation. Anytime you're for something, you're negating something else. And so ultimately, that's what it means in the first chapter of Being a Nothingness, that nothingness is at the center of what it means to be a person. I really hope that made some sense to you. The next chapter we'll be talking about will be concepts around the look, around bad faith, around also maybe a little bit more, this will be a little bit more dry and academic, but I promise you that it does yield some good results towards the end. So we're going to go through the book chapter by chapter, because I think it's something that builds on itself and allows us to understand sort of modern thought. Lastly, one of the reasons I'm doing this is these thoughts are not very mainstream, but they affect a lot of the ways in which we think and speak about ourselves. It's no mystery that when you talk about marketing, they tell you about being who you are or being authentically who you are. Those thoughts stream from this intellectual period where the question was, you're not just a subject of the state, you're not just a child of so and so. For most of humanity, whatever you are was determined before you were born. But now the pressure on you as a subject is to determine who you are. So there is a weird thing where your past is part of who you are, but it's not defined, and your future is what you decide you're going to be, and it's in your power. So in appreciating that switch, what it means to be human in 2022 is vastly different from what it means to be human in 1822. And an appreciation of maybe that's why anxiety is at the heart of what we're doing is part of what he's examining. So I hope you'll be able to join us for this trip, and have a good rest of your day.